or this way? This is easier to hear? Yeah, okay, great. Well, I'm really happy to be here today, and I don't usually start out by talking about my theater life, but since it was brought up and we're in a theater, I guess I will start by telling you how I got started writing, and that is in kindergarten. When my kindergarten teacher put on a musical every year, and the year I was 5 years old, it was going to be Sleeping Beauty. So, anybody guess what part I wanted? Sleeping Beauty. Sleeping Beauty. Ah, I was 5, people. So guess which part I did not get? You guys got that right off the bat, which is a little bit, crushing. You're right. I did not get the part of Sleeping Beauty, and I was crushed. And while I was waiting in the wings to come out with my little bitty part, I had an idea. And that was, if I wrote my own plays, I could star in them. And so that's what I started doing. I started writing plays, actually, technically, I didn't know how to write in kindergarten, but I knew how to make things up. So I started making up plays, and my friends would be in them, and we would we would invite our parents to come and watch them. And I did that all through high school, or elementary school, and in high school I wrote the homecoming skits, and in college I got involved in touring children's theater. And after college I started a touring children's theater company, and I still write a few plays now and then, and some of them are still touring around in the Midwest. This one is called Pirates of the Carrot Bean, and it's about healthy eating habits. It's for the elementary kids, okay? And anyway. So that's how I got started writing, but now we're going to get into how did I get started writing books. Well, first of all, let me say that, since I didn't before, that I am very happy to be here because, I love being around books and readers. And you're all readers, right? Yes? Okay. That is good because readers are smarter, better looking. No, well, maybe. They have bigger imaginations. They have bigger dreams. They accomplish bigger things. And studies show, let's see, I have a study right here that shows that readers have whiter teeth, fresher breath, less gingiva. No, this is an ad for a dentist. Sorry. But, okay, do you want a big mind or a little tiny mind? Big mind? Do you want a big imagination or a little tiny imagination? Big one. Do you want to solve the world's problems or do you want to create more of them? No, you don't. You got to read. That's where it all is going to happen. And the other reason that reading is great is it is a great way to research your life. And what do I mean by that? I'm going to get to that. But first I have to show you another picture of my dog. Okay. Another reason I'm glad to be here, I want to bring this up too, is this is where I'm from. I came here from Minnesota, right there, Duluth, Minnesota, on Lake Superior, which I'm sure you know is the biggest lake in the world. Also the coldest. And it's right now snowing there. So I'm just liking your weather. and really enjoying that too. So, and when I am at home, here's where I write. It's I call it my little house in the backyard. And I often write on paper with a pen. And that's kind of how I start stories, and then eventually I'll start putting them into the computer and doing it that way. So here's my family. I know that the family member you're probably most interested in knowing more about is, of course, my dog. Am I right? Yeah. I'll tell you what, my dog is very smart. He's a smart dog. Why? Because he reads. And right there, he's researching. He may look like he's asleep, but no, he's just concentrating on that book. So he's probably doing research for his future dog life. And what I meant when I said that it's great research for your life is that many of the books that you're reading now may have a direct influence on what you do, who you become and even what kind of person you become. You might not recognize it now, but many people have recognized it later. If you want to be, let's say, an undersea explorer like Robert Ballard, you know who Robert Ballard is? The guy that discovered the Titanic. He made himself a submarine and he went down and he found that ship. I think I'm right about that. His book, favorite book when he was a kid, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. He said this is the book that made him want to be an undersea explorer. So you could read that. Or if you want to be like Steve Wozniak, who invented the first Apple computer and made millions of dollars, you could read Tom Swift. Tom Swift is kind of an old series of books about an inventor, Tom, who invented all these crazy things like a giant robot. Or maybe he didn't. Yeah, I think he did invent that. But anyway, Steve Wozniak credits these books for making him interested in becoming an inventor. And if you look right here, I think this thing right here kind of looks like the first Apple IIe computer, if you've ever seen one. So maybe you got the idea from that. Or if you want to be a medical innovator, like the guy who performed the first successful heart transplant, anybody want to guess what book inspired him to go into the work that he does? Is there a book called Heart Transplant? Oh, right? Okay, what character, somebody raise your hand to tell me, what character? The Tin Man. And the line that this guy, yeah, he needed a heart, right? And he said, if I only had a heart. That was one of his lines, and that's the line that this guy, whose name I can't think of right now, carries around with him as he goes on his rounds in the hospitals every day. So you could also, for research, read my books. But I know you might be thinking, I have no plans to be a samurai or a spy or a sleuth or a crazy girl who kidnaps her little sister and runs over the Norwegian mountains while being chased by that guy. Why should I read these books? And to that, I can only say, you should just read them and find out. Because who knows? Who knows how books will affect your future life? As for me, I realized that the books that I loved as a kid have directly influenced my life and what I've chosen to write about. One of my favorite books when I was a kid, Pippi Yay, you guys know it? I'm so happy. Okay, this book, we have a lot of Pippi Longstocking fans, I think. This book directly influenced my housekeeping style, for one thing. But also, I had Pippi in my mind when I wrote this book, West of the Moon. I guess I have a picture of that you can see better. So in this book, Astrid is a little Norwegian girl, and she is very fierce, independent, resourceful, creative, and naughty. Actually quite a bit naughtier than Pippi. But Pippi was my inspiration for her. So, let's see, what else? Oh yes, also when I was a kid, I don't know if has anybody in here read this book? Yeah, yay! A couple people. Snow Treasure. I love this book when I was a kid. It's about how the Norwegian kids smuggled the gold out of Norway when it was occupied by Nazi Germany during World War II. Can you guess how they did it? They put it on their sleds and they went down a long, long hill right past the noses of the German guards. So when it came time to write my second book, and I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, I remembered how much I loved this book, and I thought I would like to write about that same time period and that same place, because not a lot of people really know what happened in Norway during World War II, where 400,000 German troops occupied a country of under 3 million people. Anybody doing the math? That's one German soldier for every 8 Norwegians. So and they really clamped down on the Norwegians too. And yet, there was a really strong resistance movement. So my character is based on he's a real person who I interviewed. He's still alive. Erling Storeston. I interviewed him for this book, Shadow on the Mountain. And he started his resistance activities by delivering underground illegal newspapers. The Germans did not like these newspapers because they told the truth about the war and what was going on in the world. And if you even possessed one, the penalty for that could be death. So that was a serious thing as a 14-year-old that he started delivering these on his bicycle. And then he became a courier and delivering coded messages on his bicycle or on skis. Then he was made a spy, and eventually someone gave his name up to I'm not going to tell you what he spied about because you can read about it in this book. But someone gave up his name to the Gestapo, and he had to escape to Sweden, which was neutral at that time, over the mountains, the Norwegian mountains, on skis, a journey that took him 5 nights of skiing. Had to ski at night because people were on his tail. And all of that's true. All of that really happened to Mr. Storeston, who I interviewed for this book. So it is a novel, so there's also fiction in it, but all of those basic facts are true. Do you have a question? Yeah. How old was he? He started out at age 14. When what? Oh, he was about 18 then. Yeah. Or maybe 19 by then. So yes, so that book, Snow Treasure, directly influenced me to want to write Shadow on the Mountain. Then I also was a Nancy Drew fan. Nancy Drew, yay, fans? Yeah. Well, I loved Nancy Drew and other mysteries when I was a kid, and I still love them, and I read a lot of them, and I like to watch them on TV. And I finally decided I love them so much, I want to try writing one. And that's a lot of what writing is, I think. I think that writing does come from a superior devotion to reading. I also feel you cannot be a writer unless you are a reader. It would be like being a cook who doesn't like to eat food. So if you want to be a writer, just start reading everything you can get your hands on, is my advice to you. So this is the mystery that I wrote, just came out this spring, called Enchantment Lake. Takes place at a northern Minnesota lake where there are a lot of rustic cabins, not unlike the lake my family has a cabin on. And there's a lot of mysterious deaths. And my character, Francie Fry, is going to have to, whose friends call her French Fry, is going to have to solve these. Are they murders or are they accidents? She'll have to solve it, and you'll have to read the book to find out. And I did not realize how much Nancy Drew influenced me on that book until someone pointed out to me the name of my character, Francie. And then there's Nancy. And then Francie's boyfriend is Nels. And does anybody remember? You remember Nancy's boyfriend? Ned. I did not know. This was totally subconscious on my part, but I think it's there somewhere. So the book that made me want to really become a writer was this one. Yay, Harriet the Spy. And there's a movie too, yeah. But there wasn't a movie when I was a kid. So that's her spy notebook, and I still carry a spy notebook with me everywhere I go. And I loved Harriet the Spy so much, I even went through a Harriet the Spy phase, and that's me in it. You can see I even have the same glasses that she has. And, of course, I was writing too. I'm not going to show that picture very long. That was enough. I wasn't always a smart reader. I went through one whole summer reading nothing but comic books and Nancy and Sluggo comic books, which is like the dumbest of the dumb. And I also went through a phase where I wouldn't read any book that had one of those on it. These right here. If it had a sticker on it like this, I figured it was no good. Apparently, I had read one. I didn't like it. I thought it was bad. And this, to me, was the seal of disapproval. So do you realize what that means? It means I wouldn't have read my own book when I was a kid. And that would have been sad. So don't let it happen to you. You can all have the opportunity to read this book. So some kind librarian, fortunately, talked me out of that phase with that book. Yeah? I hope you have all read Island of the Blue Dolphins. Yes. So I love this book, and I think that a lot of you do too, which is great. What I didn't realize until I was talking to a group like yours, and somebody said, "Oh, that cover looks a lot like your cover." And I didn't even think about it, but that's not even where the similarities end, because you remember Island of the Blue Dolphins, based on a real story of a real person who was, she was marooned on an island by herself for a very long time, and she had to be very resourceful and creative to keep herself alive. Well, Heart of a Samurai is also based on the story of a real, hang on a second. We have a little tricky setup here. Real person who really lived. His name was John Manjiro, and he's the first Japanese person to come to America in 1841. This is during the time that Japan lived in isolation. So Japan, of course, as you know, is a bunch of islands, and it made it possible for them to shut themselves off from the rest of the world. For 250 years, from 1600 to 1853, they lived in total isolation. They didn't let anyone into the country, and they did not allow their citizens to go and come back. So John Manjiro is a real person. His name was not John when he started out. It was just simply one word, Manjiro, because he was just a peasant, a fisherman. He sets off with his 4 fishermen friends. He's only 14 years old at the time. He's older than that in this picture. And they get swept away from the coast of Japan and drift 250 miles. So right here, Shikoku. They set off from there. They get caught up in a very violent storm, and because of wind and current, they get swept away and drift 250 miles across the open ocean until, boom. What happens? Shipwreck, right there. On that island called Torishima. And there it is. That's what it looks like now. When Manjiro was shipwrecked there, it looked like this. It's an actively volcanic island, and it did erupt after they were there. So this is, you saw it was kind of a barren looking place, not much to eat. In fact, the only thing there is to eat when he arrives, anybody want to guess? Okay, yeah, I heard it, birds. Oh no, that's my dog. Not that. Short-tail albatross. And they have to eat these birds raw because there's no way to cook them, of course. But they help them to survive. And then, after the eggs hatch and the chicks fledge, all the birds fly away. They're migratory. They're all gone. So there's no more food. There's no fresh water. The fishermen are almost starved. When? Anybody? Huh? Someone comes. Who do you think it is? Oh, no. I wasn't asking you what your face is painted like. No, it was an American whaling ship. Yeah. Okay. So when Manjiro sees a ship like this, of course, he and his companions have never seen anything like it. The government of Japan doesn't want its citizens to leave. They certainly don't want them building a big ship like that can go out in the ocean. So that's the first surprise. When he gets on board, the surprises are just beginning. He has never worn clothes with pockets or buttons. never tasted bread or had a sip of milk, probably has never sat in the chair, because Japanese people sat on the floor cross-legged, and they tied their clothes with sashes and so on. And he's never heard English spoken, nor have the Americans heard Japanese, because they've been isolated. And the only thing he's heard about these Westerners that he's encountering for the first time is that they look like that. That's because all Westerners were considered barbarians at that time. And actually, the whalers probably did look like that. You know, they were big, they were hairy, they had a lot of facial hair, a lot of them had scary blue eyes, and they really, really stunk. And why do you suppose that was? Yeah. They've been gone. Yeah, that's right. The whaling ships went out for like 3 or 4 years at a time. That's a long time without a shower, right? I don't know if they brush their teeth. That's a good question. But there's another reason they stunk. And it has to do with fish, whales. Whales, which aren't really fish, but they are like giant fish, right? They were whalers. So what they did was they caught whales, they cut off the blubber, and they boiled the blubber on the ship's deck in big pots, and it made this greasy, black, sooty smoke that permeated the deck of the ship, but also their hair, their clothes, probably their skin, and then they all slept crammed together between the decks below. And I'm sure it was very alarming to the Japanese fishermen who were accustomed to bathing every day, when possible. And but Manjiro does a really unlikely thing in the situation. He makes friends. And how do you suppose he goes about it? Raise your hands if you have an idea. Yeah. Right, he offered to help. That's right. He offered to help. Anything else? What would you do if you were stuck on a ship with a bunch? Now remember, the Americans cannot take him back to Japan because it's closed. And the Japanese would fire on an American ship if it entered a port there. So he asks questions, and he begins to learn the language. And he makes friends. And his best friends become the captain. No, they stay friends. And because of this friendship, he has many, many adventures, which I'm not going to tell you about, because you can read about them in this book. Everybody. So I will tell you that because of this friendship, the family, it's such a powerful friendship, these two families are still friends. They get together once a year, once in Japan and once in the US. And you can probably tell which family is which. That over there, that's me. I'm not related to any of them, but I managed to get myself in the picture anyway. So these are the Whitfields, and those are the Nakahamas. Manjiro got a second name when he got back to Japan, and you can find out how that happens, along with a lot of other things, in the companion book to Heart of a Samurai, which you guys all have a copy of. So now I gave you a little introduction to Manjiro, and you will recognize him when he appears in this story. So what happens in the story? I'm just going to read a very short little beginning, and then let's see what we can figure it out. Different book? No, this is the same book you guys have. Don't follow along, because I'm going to confuse you. Because I'm not going to read straight through. Yoshi was a leaf spinning in the summer breeze. He was water running over stones. He was a thin, free air. Or at least that's what he tried to be. But really he was just Yoshi, spinning, lunging, twisting, and slashing. The sword he imagined flashing in his hands was only a length of bamboo. His blade did not exactly flash, but it was at least burnished by the early morning sunlight. So this is, I forgot to say the date, but it's July 8th, 1853. Monumental moment in Japan's history. Except for the brook and the silvery call of a bird, it was quiet, a familiar quiet, old as these hills and the nearby temple, old as the silent stone Buddha who watched him at his sword practice. But now he noticed that there was a sound, a kind of dull thumping, as if his heart were beating somewhere outside his body. It was so faint, it was almost not a sound. He walked to the rocky outcropping that overlooked the village and the bay beyond. A humid haze hung over the valley, made thicker by the smoke from cooking fires. Beyond the village, the blue water of the bay winked in the early morning sun. Everything seemed the same as always, and yet, this morning, something seemed different. It was as if everything, the village, the hills beyond, the early morning mist and the smoke from cooking fires, the last reverberation of the temple bell, even the water in the bay, everything seemed to be holding its breath. The only sound was the steady thumping Yoshi had noticed earlier and which had grown closer. He now recognized it as a runner's soft thudding footfall. Next, the runner himself appeared, a man dressed in a short kimono and a lacquer hat who raced along the path toward the daimyo's dwelling place. The man glanced at Yoshi as he ran past. "You'd better hang on to your sword, little samurai," he panted. "What?" Yoshi said. "Why?" "In the bay," the man called over his shoulder. "Black dragons, belching smoke." What a crazy person, Yoshi thought. But when he turned back to glance at the valley one more time, he saw something he had not noticed before. Far down the bay, toward the ocean, puffs of black smoke rose into the air. What is it? Dragons? Volcanoes? Actually, that's interesting that you say volcanoes, because it was speculated that Japan's enemies had found a way to harness erupting volcanoes and to push them toward the country when they saw the smoke. What's that? Was it possible? I don't think it's possible. No, it's ships. It's black smoke from steamships, ships that move either with or without sails, which the Japanese had never encountered before. And this is what they looked like to Japanese artists at the time, because they seemed like very malevolent kinds of things, and they probably were, because they were loaded with cannons and guns and howitzers and all kinds of modern weaponry. So remember, at this point, Japan had lived in isolation for 250 years, and they had been developing the arts. They had beautiful textiles and gorgeous woodblock prints. They really mastered that art, and they came up with a cuisine and a whole complex system of manners and all kinds of things having to do with art and culture. In the meantime, the West was having wars, and they had been fighting each other so much for those 250 years that the weaponry had grown increasingly more developed. And Japan, of course, was full of samurai with what? Swords. They had swords, and they had some old cannon from the Dutch from about 1600s that didn't work very well. So when these black steamships, which look a little bit more like that in that picture, show up, the samurai all go down, as many as can, go to the waterfront to defend the country against these invaders. And what's going to happen? I'm not going to tell you. You guys got the book, right? Oh, you will. You will. You all will get one. Don't worry. So, so I'm not going to tell you a lot about the story, except to say, okay, so the steamships come. Commodore Perry has come to Japan to request a trading agreement. He wants to get Japan to open to the West. Japan has a lot of things that the West would like to get their hands on, let's put it that way. And this is how he was depicted by an amateur Japanese artist who probably never saw him, but again, that is the way that Westerners were supposed to look, and so that's the way they were drawn. So obviously, when I start writing a book, I like, especially that one, there's a lot of things I don't know. I didn't know a lot about Japan in the Edo period. That's the period of time we're living in. I didn't know a lot about fighting, samurai fighting or kendo fighting. And so what did I have to do to write the book? Research. And what kinds of things do you think I did? Talk to people? Yeah. Yeah, I do, especially like for a book like this, I talk to people who are experts in Japanese history. I talked to a kendo practitioner who could tell me about how the fighting goes. Of course, I watched a lot of samurai movies too for this book. And then, of course, interviews. I do interviews too. I certainly used interview a lot for this book, for instance. So what else? What other things? Oh, yeah, you're going to get a book. Don't worry. Okay. Yeah. Or she wants to offer a method of research, right? Oh, okay. All right. Ask away. Oh, yeah. What did Japan have that the other countries wanted? That's a good question. Okay, so remember the whaling ship? Japan had all these whales swimming around the islands. And those whalers wanted those whales. Now, it's not like they couldn't creep up there and get them. But then what happens if they're caught in a storm? What if they run out of water or food? And when steamships came along, coal. They needed coal to fire those ships. And they believed that Japan was just chock full of it. They didn't know whether it was or not, but they really thought it was. And so they wanted to be able to stop in Japan to get water, to make repairs to their ship, to get more food, and to load up on coal. And then there was all kinds of like other talk, like maybe Japan had gold. You know, who knows? Nobody knew anything. So they just wanted to get in there and find out what they could get out of it. You know, that's the usual way it goes. Okay, so what other kinds of research do you think I do? I do, yes. I have gone to Japan several times, and that is one of the things that I find is really useful when I'm writing, is to be able to go to the country. And for instance, I went there when I was researching Heart of a Samurai, and I found out that Manjiro is a kind of a popular hero there. That's a statue of him. I went to the area where he lived and saw that it was very rugged, kind of dangerous looking coastline and dangerous place to be a fisherman in a little boat. So I knew that he probably was quite courageous to be willing to do that kind of work. I went to his little village and I saw this smoke right here. Anybody want? It's not from the ships, but any other guesses as to houses, cooking? Well, cooking is close. They are smoking bonito over wood fires, which they would have done for hundreds of years. And then once I smelled that smoke, it was kind of sweet and pungent smelling, I knew that when Manjiro gets back to his village, he's going to smell that smell and he's going to know he's home. Because you know how certain smells just call back places. And I also visited where he lived in the U.S. and where he went to school and where he learned to write his alphabet, and went to the whaling museum to learn about whales. That's my dog imitating a whale. And saw the little tiny boats that they went out to catch whales. So like, here's a row of people. You guys get in one of those boats and row backwards towards the whale, which is twice as long as this place. It's so big, his heart is as big as a Volkswagen. That's how big the whales are. I can never remember how much they weigh, but I can remember that. That's a big creature. And it didn't always end well for the whalers either, as you can see in these pictures. So yes, I did travel to Japan, and it was a good thing I did, because in my first page in Heart of a Samurai, during one of my drafts, I had a line that said snow. It was snowing, something about it snowing. So then I went to where he lived, and it was like, no, that's like Miami there. That's warm, and yeah, people have to leave. Okay, I'm sorry that you're not going to get my dog's writing tips before you have to go. Oh, but yeah, I do want to just give them each. All right, you guys, do you want to hear my dog's writing tips? Okay, he's been waiting all this time to give you the tips. So, number 1, challenge yourself. He will never take a little tiny stick if he can get a much bigger one. And I think about that when I look at him hauling these big trees around in the woods and sometimes getting caught between, other trees. Challenge yourself. Why read an easy book if you can read a harder book? Or when you're writing, why dash off your writing when you can really get down and work hard on it? Not every book or idea is going to be a good fit for you. My dog did not like these booties, but we got him because we were walking on very sharp stones, and after he had taken them off and cut his pads of his feet, he liked the booties better. And sometimes it's like that with reading. Read a book, don't like it, but a couple years later, a year, maybe even a few months later, you try it again. It's the best book you ever read. Moby Dick, for instance. I tried to read it when I was about your age. No way. Could not get through it. Then I tried reading it in college when it was actually assigned. I still couldn't get through it. But when I wrote this book right here, oh my gosh, I read Moby Dick about 6 times and loved it. Now I'm a big Herman Melville fan. So you never know. Yeah, exactly. Finish what you start. You are never going to see my dog leave a milk bone in the bottom of a box if he gets a hold of the box. And we should be like that with our books, just devour them. And with our writing, try and keep forging on, even though it gets hard. Finish it. Don't hoard your ideas. Whoa. Like this dog, not my dog, this is a dog named Missy, and the sign says, I am a hoarder. My name is Missy, I am a hoarder. I have been a hoarder for 2.5 years. If Mom had not moved the couch, I would be hoarding still. So Missy has hidden all of her chew toys under the couch rather than actually enjoying them. And so why do I bring this up? Because sometimes we have a tendency to want to keep an idea because it's so good, we should save it. And don't ever do that, because if you hold on to an idea in your head and don't use it, it's going to act like a plug, keeping all the other good ideas from getting out. I think there's always a better idea. There are always more ideas, and the more ideas you use and share with each other, the more ideas that you have. So share them around, give them out, use them. There's always going to be more. Mistakes will be made. This is not blood. It's paint. Gallon of red paint and the dog in the back of a station wagon. My son driving recklessly. Disaster. Anyway, and he was pink for the whole summer, too. It was very sad. But when I see this picture, I think mistakes are an inevitable part of life and also part of the writing process. You have to make mistakes to get to where you're going. John Lasseter, the founder of Pixar, when he gets together with his creative team, he says, get right to it, start making mistakes. Mistakes are an inevitable part of the process, and every Pixar movie ever made was the worst motion picture ever at some point or another. And I loved hearing that because I feel that way about my novels. My novels, at some point or another, were the worst novel ever written, and some of those pages in there could attest to that. So these are the drafts that I wrote in order to get to this. So when I look at that stack of papers, I think about maple syrup. Anybody know why? Pancakes. Yeah, it does look like pancakes, and it's delicious. But no, actually, does anyone know how many gallons of maple sap it takes to make 1 gallon of syrup? Huh? 12, 25, a lot? 40. 40 gallons. I live in maple tree country. 40 gallons of maple syrup, sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. So that's my sap, and this is my syrup. That's the way I look at it. You got to have the sap to make the syrup, too. It doesn't just happen. You know, you don't just get syrup out of the tree, and you usually don't get a really good piece of writing right boom like that. You have to go through the sap process first. Okay, where are we? Oh yeah. So obviously writing isn't easy for me, and it took me a long, long time in my life to figure out I kind of like the hard work. I thought things should be easy, but once I figured out that the hard work can be kind of rewarding and enjoyable, then I was able to start writing books. Although, I will say, it sometimes feels like mountain climbing. See, there's me down there, and over the course of a year or so it takes me to write a book. It's a lot like that until finally, whew, done. So obviously, you have to, yeah?
Did you start writing other things before you took on writing books?
Yeah. Well, I wrote plays. I wrote for theater for many, many, many years. Long time before I started writing books. And it was helpful. I mean, I feel like my playwriting experience has really helped me with writing novels. And theater in general has been helpful. Yeah. They're like my children. I love them all equally. That's one thing I say, and the other thing I say is, the book you have in your hands, right? It's the best. It's definitely the one I worked the hardest on. So you have my hardest effort in your hand, partly because of the research involved and really wanting to get it right. So I worked pretty hard on that. And just telling the story. And it was fiction, too. A lot of it's fiction, more so than some of my other books that had a real life to follow. So I have 2 main characters, Yoshi and Jack. And Jack, by the way, if you guys were living in the 1850s, you could be working on U.S. Navy ships right now as powder monkeys, meaning carrying gunpowder from the hold of the ship to the guns up on the gun deck in a little backpack on your back, making yourselves into little human powder kegs. Yeah. How many books? I have 8 books, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the mystery, and then 3 picture books. So that's from when I started writing books. Before that, I was writing for theater. Okay, question. I'll just finish with the dog. He's almost done. 2 more things. Obviously, you have to dig if you don't find what you're looking for. And if you still don't find it, you have to dig a little bit more. Keep your eyes on the prize. Don't give up. And the number one tip that my dog would like to leave you with today in writing, reading, or life in general is just Go for it. All right, okay, now we have questions. Okay. So, yes. Yeah, it took me quite a long time to get this one published. This is my first novel, and it was rejected many times. But here's what was going on: when it would come back, whether there, often there were comments, and I would consider the comments and try to make changes. And I did revised. That stack of papers you saw before, there's probably 3 or 4 times that many stacks of paper for this book, because it was my first novel. I thought it would take me 3 months to write. Guess how long it took? Yes, exactly. Yep. So I tried to improve it each time it was rejected, and then it got sent out again, and finally somebody took it. And an interesting story about that is the first time it was, or not, one of the later times it was rejected, the editor said, "I don't want anything in the story that didn't really happen." Well, all I had to go on was Manjiro's own story, and he never said a bad word about anybody. So I didn't have any personal conflict or bullies, so I had to make some up, I thought. So I made up some bullies and put them in there. And when she said she didn't want anything that wasn't, verifiably true, I took those bullies out, and then she took it again, and she said, "Well, if there really isn't any conflict." So anyway, when my editor who took the book, he said, "You need some bullies." So I just stuck them back in and sent the manuscript back to him, and he thought I was a really fast writer. I had to tell him later, I don't really write that fast, just happen to have that. So yeah. But now these other books have not been so hard because this book did very well, and so my publisher keeps asking me for books, so I'm very lucky that way. Yeah. Like procrastinate? Yes, there's coffee, and then they check the email, and then maybe if I get on Facebook, that's not a very good idea. And yeah, there's some procrastination that occurs, but not really any rituals. Yeah. Was there a hand over here? Ah, yeah. Oh, well. You can ask me any question except that one. I'll tell you what, don't go into writing books if you wanted to become a multimillionaire. You should do it for love. That's why most of us do it. And because it's a great thing to write. It's a fun thing just to do for yourself. Yep. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah, it's just like school. When you have an assignment due, they give you a deadline. They say you have to have you have to have your first draft in by this time, and then I need a finished draft by this time. And you don't make your money, speaking of money, unless you have the deliver. So it is yeah, it can be stressful, but it's also helpful because you have to do it, and you can't procrastinate quite as much as you might ordinarily want to if you have the deadline looming. And for some people, me included, the deadline can be the motivator and really make you sit down and do the work. Novel. How old was I when I wrote my first novel? Well, my children were about this tall. I don't know. It was probably 2010. Came out in 2010. What? What? I'm missing the fun. What? Oh no, no. Wait, are you putting them up to this question? Yes, Who am I voting for? That's a sacred thing that you know don't have to tell anybody. That's why they have those little booths, right? I don't think I need to figure that out quite yet. Big suitcase full of unmarked bills. Yeah. A check comes in the mail. Sorry? Oh, thank you for asking. The question is, what am I working on now? And what other topics might I be interested in working on? So right now, I am working on a sequel to West of the Moon. This book was inspired by my great-great-grandmother's diary. She immigrated from Norway in 1851. Some of my relatives thought I should write a book about her, so I dutifully read her diary, which thankfully has been translated into English. But while I was reading it, I came across a passage where, on the sailing ship coming to America, she meets a young girl traveling all alone, no prospects in America, no family, nobody with her. And I started having all these questions. Who's this young girl? How did she get here? What does she think she's going to do? And pretty soon I was more interested in her than I was in my great-great-grandmother. So I ended up making up a story for this young girl who I thought, you know, was just an imaginary person until the most serendipitous thing happened at my first book signing for this book. A woman came up to me, introduced herself, and said, "I am the great-great-granddaughter of the maid your great-great-grandmother hired." So it's pretty cool, and it's sort of a test to the power of stories to take us to the past and join us together again in the present. So how are we doing? Is that good? Okay.
I think it gives us a little bit of time for book signing.
Oh, book signing.
So
Right.
really, thank you
Okay.
so much, Ms. Royce. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.